Life had never been easy for him. Growing up in a country torn apart by war and political unrest, survival was a daily struggle. His neighborhood bore the scars of a conflict, crumbling buildings, streets filled with rubble, and the constant echo of fear in the air. Despite it all, he carried a dream deep in his heart. He dreamed of becoming a doctor, not for the wealth or prestige, but to heal those who were injured in the endless violence. He wanted to be the kind of person who could make a difference, even in the smallest of ways. He would often sit by the dim light of a lamp, studying hard and imagining the day he would wear a white coat and bring hope to those who had none. But in a world like his, dreams were fragile, and hope was a dangerous thing to hold on to. One day, during a rare moment of courage, he typed out a tweet. "We deserve to live free, to speak our truth, to dream without fear." He didn't think much of it, just a fleeting thought shared with the vote of the internet. But in his country, even whispers could be deadly. The next evening, as he sat quietly at home, he heard the deafening sound of his door being smashed open. His heart skipped a beat, and before he could react, armed soldiers barged in, dragging him from his home in front of his family. His mother clung to him, pleading, but she too was torn away. His father tried to intervene, only to be beaten and left unconscious on the floor. In an instant, his world turned upside down, and he found himself shackled in the back of a military truck, his fate unknown. He hadn't even done anything wrong, yet here he was, swept into the nightmare of a regime that didn't tolerate hope. They arrived at a place he would soon come to know all too well, a dark, cold prison. It wasn't just the walls that felt oppressive, but the atmosphere. The fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that escape was impossible. His welcome party was far from what he could have imagined. He was subjected to brutal torture with no understanding of how long it would last. Then he was crammed into a filthy cell with 50 other prisoners. The floor was covered in salt, a grim reminder of death's constant presence. The salt was there for only one reason: slowing the decay of those who had perished. This was no ordinary prison. It was a place where hope went to die. The cell was a hellish cage. No beds, no toilets, nothing. The prisoners were forced to sleep on the cold, hard ground, often crammed together so tightly that they had no room to stretch out. On the rare occasion they did manage to sleep, they had to do so standing up, exhausted bodies slumped against each other for support. The lack of space and comfort led to severe injuries. Some prisoners suffered broken hands, feet, and legs, their limbs mangled from the strain of being forced to stand for hours, unable to rest. The days passed, and the lack of food became unbearable. He couldn't focus on anything but the aching emptiness in his stomach. Finally, desperate, he asked one of the guards if there was any way to get something to eat. The response he got was immediate and brutal. For daring to ask for food, he was dragged out of his cell and strapped into the electric chair. They tortured him mercilessly, the high-voltage currents coursing through his body, as the guards took pleasure in his pain. But the worst was yet to come. In the prison, there was a sadistic officer known only as Hitler who delighted in tormenting the prisoners. He forced them to act like animals. Those who failed to obey were beaten. It was a game to him, a way to break their spirits, to remind them that they were nothing. The horror didn't end here. In the bitter cold of winter, he was hung from a fence. His body was exposed to the freezing temperatures, and the pain of the cold pierced through him, making every breath feel like agony. Nightfall in the prison brought with it silence so profound it felt suffocating. The darkness, however, was never complete. Every night, one guard would methodically walk down the row of cells calling out names. The air would freeze in anticipation. For the prisoners, it was a nightly ritual of terror. Who would be called next? Who would be taken away, never to return? Each time the guards paused in front of cell, the fear would mount. Some prisoners trembled, clutching the cold steel bars as if they could somehow escape the inevitable fate. Others crawled into the corners, whispering frantic prayers, their minds unraveling under the strain of uncertainty. It wasn't the fear of torture that haunted them, it was the endless waiting, the psychological torment of not knowing whether they would survive the night. Each step of the guard's boot echoed like the countdown to their doom. The days bled into each other. Time became irrelevant. In just 1 month, 19 of his fellow prisoners died, some from the brutal conditions, others from disease, many simply from the neglect that left them to rot in their cells. The prison had no pity, no humanity. It was a place where even the most basic rights were stripped away, and life itself seemed to have no value at all. One night, he heard the blood-curdling scream of a woman. At first, he didn't know who it was, but as the day wore on, he learned it was his own mother. She too had been dragged into this hellish nightmare, and now she screamed for mercy, enduring unspeakable horror. His father, meanwhile, had been accused of being a part of an armed insurgency. The interrogator used every method of torture imaginable to force a confession. He confessed to crimes he had never committed just to end the torment. But his confession implicated his wife, branding her as an accomplice. Days after that, the husband and wife were brought in a cold, dimly lit room separately, their eyes blindfolded. The air was heavy with dread as the guards began their cruel game. First, they turned to the wife, demanding she confess to crimes she didn't commit. Her voice was firm despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I'm innocent," she declared. "My husband is innocent too. We have done nothing wrong." The guards then moved to the husband. He had no idea that his wife was in the room, blindfolded and listening to every word. When they demanded he confirm his earlier confessions, he repeated what he had been forced to say before. Yes, he admitted, hoping it would spare him from further torment. But when he found out his wife was there, his heart sank. He realized she had heard his full confession. Summoning his last ounce of strength, he shouted, "It's a lie! None of it is true! We're innocent! I only said it to stop the torture." The guards, unmoved, acted swiftly. A single shot echoed in the room as they executed him on the spot. The wife screamed. She begged for mercy, sobbing uncontrollably, but the guards showed none. A second shot rang out, silencing her as well. And just like that, in a matter of seconds, our boy lost both of his parents, completely unaware of what happened. Wake up, are you okay? Imagine you live in a place where to begin every week, 50 people are taken to be executed without proper trials or justice. A place so sinister, it's known as the Human Slaughterhouse. Names like Siberia's Black Dolphin Prison, Rwanda's Gatarma Prison, Iraq's Abu Ghraib, and Morocco's Tazmamart strikes fear, but none can compare to the horror of Saydnaya Prison in Syria, a place that defies human comprehension. Built in 1987, is located approximately 30 kilometers north of Damascus, near the Saydnaya Monastery. Originally designed to house political detainees and suppress opposition voices, including intellectuals, activists, and civilians considered threat to the regime, it's evolved into one of Syria's most infamous facilities, known as the Human Slaughterhouse, or the Black Hole. because once you're drowned into it, there is no way back. Just like a black hole swallows light and matter, this prison swallows life. The prison consists of two main sections: the red building, which houses political prisoners and civilians, and the white building, reserved for military detainees. Its architecture is deliberately designed to maximize control and instill fear. Prisoners are isolated and prevented from seeing their captors or the layout of the facility. Guards follow strict protocols, and detainees rely heavily on auditory cues to navigate and understand their environments. Although the exact architectural details of Saydnaya are not fully documented, survival testimonies and forensic reconstructions by Amnesty International and forensic architecture reveal a carefully constructed space that functions as both a site and a tool for torture. From the moment detainees arrive, they're subjected to brutal torture. Survivors recount the infamous welcome party, a grotesque initiation involving beatings with hoses, silicone bars, or sticks. Prisoners endure unimaginable methods of torture, like the breaking wheel, the electric shock, and the German chair. The breaking wheel was a medieval execution device that was used to torture and kill individuals, often after they had been severely beaten or maimed. The victim's limbs were broken and their body was strapped to a large wooden wheel. Electric shock torture involves applying high-voltage electrical currents to the victim's body, typically through electrodes attached to the skin. The electrical currents cause intense pain, muscle spasms, burns, and even cardiac arrest in some cases. This method is used to inflict extreme physical and psychological torment. The German chair, a device that bends the spine backward to the point of breaking. This form of torture was employed during the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe, particularly in Germany. The waiting game or death watch is a method used to break the spirit and the moral of the victim. In this form of torture, prisoners are subjected to the constant fear of death, where they were repeatedly called by name in the dead of night, typically with the sound of footsteps or other noises meant to simulate the approach of an executioner. They are then told they will be executed, only to learn later that the call was a false alarm. The prisoner is left in a perpetual state of fear, unsure whether they will survive or not. Over time, the stress and fear can lead to severe psychological damage, including anxiety, depression, paranoia, and even full-blown insanity. Survivors also describe being forced into salt rooms, where the ground is covered with layers of salt to preserve the bodies of those who die from torture or starvation before their burial. When I previously read about the Inquisition, where people were hung by their limbs, dismembered, and subjected to other forms of torture, I never imagined that such practices would still exist in the 21st century. This proves that humans can be worse than demons, sometimes making even demons themselves bewildered by their actions. Between 2011 and 2015 alone, up to 13,000 people were hanged. Executions are carried out at night in complete secrecy. Prisoners, blindfolded until they're being transferred, are instead taken to chambers of death. Survivors recall the haunting sound of bodies dropping into silence, each thud marking another life lost. Cells measuring just 3 times 3 are packed with up to 50 prisoners. There is no sunlight, ventilation, or medical care. Inmates often drink their own urine to survive when water is withheld for days. Contaminated food, untreated illnesses, and psychological torture, such as being forced to choose between their death or the execution of a loved one, break even the strongest spirits. On December 8, 2024, opposition forces stormed Saydnaya after entering Damascus, liberating prisoners. This marked the collapse of Bashar al-Assad regime, with government forces withdrawing from key locations like the Ministry of Defense and Damascus International Airport. However, not all prisoners have been released. While many of the prisoners' above-ground cells have been opened, a significant portion of inmates is still trapped in subterranean cells. These cells have not been accessed due to the need for special equipment, and effort to reach these prisoners are ongoing. What we should mention that some prisoners were kept so far away from the world for so long that some thought that the former Iraqi president Saddam Hussein, who was executed in 2006, is the one who's liberated them. A freed prisoner, 60 years old, with his voice trembling as he reflects on what he endured under the regime, says, "The first slap I received was in 1964, pointing out that he entered prison when he was only 14 years old, now an old, weak man." Among the widely circulated clips on social media are those shared by armed opponents, showing freed prisoners who couldn't even remember their own names, and others of female prisoners who were too terrified to even think about leaving their cells. The video shared on social media, even the most horrific ones, only provides a partial picture of the reality of human rights conditions in Syria under the Assad regime. There were women who entered prison as teenagers and unmarried, and it later became clear that they had been subjected to repeated rapes by different individuals. Some of them were released from prison without knowing the identities of their children. Saydnaya stands as a harrowing testament to human cruelty. It is a reminder of the unchecked horror of authoritarianism and the enduring struggle for justice. Though the prisoners lost their voice within their walls, their stories must never be forgotten. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to stay updated with more content.